agenda for this week. Request for bill introduction. Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have two bills that I'd like to introduce. The first one is RS 1002. That's corporate practice of medicine for naturopaths.
Are there any questions? Are there any objections to the introduction request? We'll make the request.
Thank you. The second is RS 1003, and that's naturopathic doctor scope of practice.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions? Any objection? Seeing none, we'll make the request. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any other requests for bill introduction? Seeing none, we're going to open the hearing on the reconfirmation appointment. Welcome to the committee. Is your microphone on? That little, yes.
Here we go.
Yeah, if you could speak in, the cameras actually adjust according to what microphone's on and how they're speaking. So we're supposed to have somebody from IT in the room, but for some reason they don't show up for the tax committee. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the Assessment and Taxation Committee. My name is Tom Brown, Jr., and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to appear before you in support of my reappointment to the position of Chief Hearings Officer with the State Board of Tax Appeals. I'm a lifelong Kansas resident, and I've lived in Topeka my entire life. My education consists of a BBA in accounting from Washburn University of Topeka in 1982. The areas that I studied were as follows: accounting, business law, finance, management, federal taxes, economics, and marketing. My career began with the Kansas Department of Revenue as a revenue auditor in 1982. Then in 1987, I began working in the privilege tax section, and in 1990, I started writing opinion letters and private letter rulings on different tax types and approving project exemption certificates for the Director of Taxation. Later in 1990, I joined the Tax Policy Group, and in 1995, I became a hearing officer in the Office of Administrative Appeals. As a hearing officer, I conducted informal hearings with taxpayers and/or their representative to resolve tax disputes on corporate income and sales and use tax audits, and I also served as the problem resolution officer for corporate income tax until my appointment as the Board of Tax Appeals Chief Hearing Officer in June 2020. As the Chief Hearings Officer, I have stood by my commitment to approach every hearing with an open mind and listen to all the evidence, allowing me to make an independent, efficient, and professional decision to promote certainty in state tax law. I look forward to the opportunity to continue serving the citizens of the great state of Kansas as the Chief Hearings Officer, hearing the disputes between the taxpayers and taxing authorities. Thank you for your time today, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have regarding my reappointment.
Thank you. Committee, are there any questions? I would like to compliment you for your work on the Board of Tax Appeals. It is a heavy lift. In fact, we had a senator say the other day on the floor that we would pass legislation, an amendment that was being offered, and let the courts decide. I would just be curious as to your opinion of that. I think that's relying too much on the courts, and that if we see an issue that we should try to fix it in the statute.
I think if the Kansas legislature sees an issue with an existing statute, they can address that through the proper channels. You know, you can introduce a bill. And at the board, we have it's a good policy not to overturn your own previous decisions. And that is the law of the land until another court tells you otherwise, you know. And so that's so you're not jumping all over the place.
Well, thank you. Committee, any other questions? Again, thank you for your work. You have some nice references on here.
I just wanted to make one comment. I think everybody here has a chance to be part of history. And I don't know if this has ever happened before, but y'all were part of the 37-0 vote to pass me on for the unexpired term. And then you have 9 votes here. And then if God willing, you pass this over to the full Senate, you all will get to vote on me again. So voting on Thomas P. Brown Jr. 3 times within 2 weeks, I don't know if that's ever happened to anybody. So, all right,
I don't know. That's good history.
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Committee, we usually hold these over, but since we have voted on Mr. Brown just within the last 2 weeks, would there be any objection to going ahead and dealing with the appointment of Mr. Brown while he's in the room? No objection. I think we usually hold them over 24 hours, but under this circumstance, I think that we could deal with it, especially since Mr. Brown's in the chamber, and I know his mother would be proud if she were with us too. Committee, what are your wishes? Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move we pass out the appointment for Thomas P. Brown Jr. favorably.
Thank you. It's been moved by Senator Baumgardner, seconded by Senator Alley. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Congratulations. Thank you. Committee, the next order of business is unique for this committee. We will be picking up a hearing on the Department of Revenue. Dylan, are you? Oh, great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Dylan Deere. I'm a managing analyst with the Legislative Research Department. The chair was correct in stating that it's atypical to have a policy committee reviewing a budget. Nonetheless, this is a budget you are probably quite familiar with, being the Department of Revenue. In addition to myself, Mark Bashirs, the Secretary of Revenue, is available online, as well as Chris Holm. Chris Holm is the Chief Fiscal Officer for the Department of Revenue, and they should be able to provide some detailed data for you on some of these other questions you might have. Everyone should have our budget analysis before you. The Legislative Research Department budget analysis describes the agency request and the governor's recommendation. And so it really, of course, the starting point for the legislature's budget is always the governor's recommendation. So all things are considered to be adjustments to that governor's recommendation process. I know some of you are very familiar with this process from having been on appropriations or Ways and Means previously. But I will go over a couple of the elements of the budget analysis that you see before you. On the front page is a quick agency overview. The Department of Revenue is broken up into 6 major divisions. The first is administrative services. That's your management division. You have an aid to local units of government division, which is really just pass-through dollars. Those are monies that the Department of Revenue brings in and then immediately sends back out to counties or cities that I actually will talk about in both FY21 and FY22. There is no SGF in that division. The next one is alcoholic beverage control, which regulates the distribution of alcoholic beverages and tobacco. There is no SGF in that division either. If you turn to the page. The next is tax administration, which is mostly what people think about when they think about the Department of Revenue. So that's the division that collects taxes and sends refunds and such. There's a property valuation division, which exercises the state statutes on changing the property valuation rates. And it's about 10% SGF funded. It's overwhelmingly a majority funded by the property valuation process. And then there's a motor vehicle division, which is fully funded from, of course, the fees charged for licenses and driver's licenses and also titles for cars. Couple of major issues from previous years. I'll notice, for this particular committee, the 2010 legislature for FY 2011 provided an amnesty on delinquent taxes. That was for just a couple months that was in there. And none of these other things are too terribly critical, but if you turn to the next page, on page 1377, the 2018 legislature added $2 million from the Division of Vehicles Operating Fund for the implementation and production costs related to digital license plate production. I think that's fully in place at this point, those digital license plates. If you turn to the next page on 1378, the 2019 legislative session, the Department of Revenue terminated the contract, it says contact, should be said contract, with the CGI Technologies to modernize the tax administration system and brought a large portion of that outsourced contract back in-house. A lot of the things that you're going to see going on in these budgets are still stemming from that choice that was made during the 2019 legislative session. Some of the same individuals are doing the work, but they're doing it under different umbrella companies. And so I'm going to talk a lot about the channel modernization project, and that sort of built into this decision to terminate that contract at that time. The budget summary I'm going to cover when we go through the actual FY21, so I'm going to go ahead and skip directly over that to page 1380, if that's all right. And feel free to stop me at any time if you see something you have a question about.
I'm going to pause you right there and make sure we don't have any questions at this point. Committee, any? Seeing none? Thank you.
Certainly. I want to talk very, very briefly about performance measures. The Department of Revenue does provide a series of performance measures. The requirement to submit performance measures is a requirement established by the 2016 legislature in House Bill 2739. A couple I'd like to point out in particular, if you look at the fourth down, that number of random control buys performed for the sale of alcohol to underage persons. There was 390 in 2018, 380 in 2019, 404 in 2020. But you look at the 612 and 612, so you're definitely seeing an intention by ABC to increase the number of random control buys in order to try to find non-compliant vendors. Also, the compliance rate for controlled buys for the sale of alcoholic beverage to underage persons was sitting around 80%, and you're looking at a desire by ABC to try to push that up to about 85% for compliance. If you go down to the last two performance measures, the average customer wait time at the 10 largest driver's license offices, you see it was around 35 minutes in 2018, around 20 minutes in 2019, down to about 10 minutes in 2020, and they're looking to push that down to around 9. There have been some substantial expansions in the Division of Motor Vehicles as far as both the number of offices and also the number of clerks inside of those offices that have occurred over the last 3 years, and that's sort of driven up that budget. Once again, that budget is fully supported by the fees that are charged, but definitely there has been some substantial expansions in that area. And last, the total transactions at the state driver's license offices. This is just, there's only really one data point on here I really wanted to point out, and that's the 2020 actuals, which comes in right at about 540,000, which is much lower than the 700 to 800,000 that they had been having. And that's just as a result of the closures of those license offices. And so that's definitely driven down the number of actual transactions in that particular year.
Thank you, Dylan. I do have a question and concerns committee. We did pass the legislation in 2016, but it was a performance-based budget that also would demonstrate the projects, where that funding came from, so that we would know what's going on. This is not compliant at all, and I have concern over that. I'm going to say that with every budget that I'm working on, and I want everybody to be aware of it. This is not following the statute or the intention of the legislature.
You're welcome. I would note that the Legislative Research Department continues to push for measures that are based on like a cost-benefit analysis, so you know what the specific goals of each program are and what is the cost to achieve each one of those goals. Those are the types of measures that we are seeking from agencies, as the chair had noted.
Thank you. And also the funding, where that funding resource is. We are jumping through hoops for federal money, and at times it's costing us more than we're actually getting for that money. So, committee, are there any questions? Senator Close.
Yeah, it's just a question in regard to the wait time. Is there any reflection on the phone calls and calls answered, especially during COVID, and calls returned?
I'd have to,
I think that's a question for the committee, or for the, would you mind if we wait and hold that question for the secretary? Would that be okay, Don?
be fine.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any other questions? I just think the secretary will have the answer as well. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, on page 1381, there's a 10-year table. These are operating expenditures only, so you exclude things like aid to local units of government, so that like flow through. So this is like salaries and wages, contractual services, capital outlay. You can see it's been pretty flat over the last 10 years. The only divergence was in 2017, and that was that CGI contract where a lot of that stuff looked like it was going to get outsourced, but ended up not. So in a momentary divergence, but things are sort of trending back towards flat. On page 1382, you have a sum op bud table, which is just trying to describe for the committee what are the expenditures for each program in the agency request and the governor's recommendation, as well as 2020 actual expenditures. And we also break those down by major object, salaries and wages, contractual services.
Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just have a quick question. We received the document that was provided by the Department of Revenue, and they indicated that they eliminated all out-of-state travel for fiscal year 21, which amounted to $295,000. So in building fiscal year 22 and so forth, is the travel included in there, or have they struck that?
Madam Chair, when I review the 22 budget, I'll address that in greater detail, but it has been stricken by the governor. So the governor made a recommendation and adjusted that out of their budget.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
You're welcome. So it's just providing some little bit of background and then some major sources of funding for it. There's a lot more sources of funding for the Department of Revenue than that, but that's some major sources that are in there. And with that, if you could turn to page 1383, and then we can start talking about the budget proper. So the 2020 legislature approved an SGF budget of a little over $16 million. Okay, you have an increase of $21,500 for a reappropriation of funding. That's SGF funding that was appropriated in the previous fiscal year but was unspent, and so it just sort of rolls over as long as the appropriations bill provides that authority. And then you have a decrease of $86,829 as a result of the governor's SGF allotment. If you turn very briefly to page 1385, there's some detail on that allotment. There's a CAPERS D&D allotment for this agency and a coronavirus relief fund swap. So neither one of these really had any operational impact. These allotments didn't have an operational impact on the Department of Revenue. There's a 1% rate for a CAPERS, like a death and disability policy that's included. That was put on a moratorium for 1 year. And so that money was able to be lapsed out of the budget. The CAPERS indicates that there's adequate balance inside of that fund to continue to provide those benefits. It's just was put on a moratorium for those contributions. And the coronavirus.
I want to back you up. You said that there was money that was rolled over. Which column was that again?
So if you look at, it's the SGF dollar. So if you look inside the box, it's the top left-hand number, so 15.9. And if you look at the first bullet, it's the 21,547. And it's pretty common from a lot of SGF-funded agencies, when you have $16 million, to have a little bit of money left over, not spend down to absolute zero at the end of each year. But moving forward.
One of the things that I had asked for is the expenditures, too, of how much they actually spent. So would this reflect that they didn't spend all that they were budgeted for in the prior year?
That's from that particular fund. So from the SGF, they did not spend about $21,547, and that authority carries over by action of law into the next year. If you want actual spend, a good place to look is your sum op bud table, and that first column is actual spend for this agency.
Great, thank you. Committee, any other questions? Thank you.
Not a problem. Moving very briefly back to the governor's allotments, there's also a CRF swap. There's a variety of agencies that expended special revenue funds, stuff like that, back in FY 2020 for buying PPE or other coronavirus relief measures. They then determined that coronavirus relief funds, federal funds, could be used, and so they sort of swapped those out and then lapsed the SGF as a result of that. So if you look below the box, the agency is submitting on page 1383. The agency is submitting a revised estimate of $108.5 million, including $16 million SGF. It's an all funds increase of $59,000 or 0.1%. And there's about $1.6 million here in hardware and software implementation costs for a channel modernization project. That's sort of the son of the previous project, so there's elements of that, but it's done internally rather than outsourced. And those increases were partially offset by a reduction of $890,000 in aid to local units of government from the Special County Mineral Production Tax Fund. There's an 8% excise tax on gas, coal, oil produced in Kansas. That flows right back to the counties in which those gas, coal, or oil were extracted. So it's basically, it comes in and then goes right back out. There's a reduction of $323,000 in the motor vehicle division related to the sale of vehicle license tags and paper, and $150,000 in contract attorney expenditures. The agency also includes 1,089.3 FTE positions. This is an increase of 10.6 net FTE positions. And the agency added 17 additional FTE positions in the motor vehicle division for the Wichita West driver's license location. So that's a new driver's license location, Wichita West, and 3 additional FTE in the Wichita, which are roving positions. So these individuals would move between inside the Wichita region in order to cover as necessary. The agency also added 4 FTE positions in tax administration for IT analysts. And then there were some reductions that offset those increases in the administration division, mostly in information technology analysts. And if you turn to the next page, this is going to provide a breakdown with some additional detail on the salaries and wages, contractual services, commodities, and capital outlay for this agency budget. In contractual services, you can see some additional detail. The increases in the motor vehicle division are attributable to building rental and maintenance out of 142 and postage of 109, and they're partially offset by decreases in advertising and other fees of $71,200. Capital outlay is up about $500,000. That's channel modernization, which I already mentioned. And then you have a decrease of $890 in aid to locals, which is that oil and gas valuation depletion, which I already mentioned. The governor recommends expenditures of $108.1, including $15.3 million SGF in 21. It's an all funds decrease of $451,547 or 0.4%. SGF decrease of $621,000. The governor recommends deleting $218,999, $219,000 really, or 0.3% from agency salaries by increasing the shrink rate. The shrink rate is just how much you pull out of salaries and wages based upon an assumption of how many vacant positions there are going to be in any particular year. You probably would be familiar with the fact that in any agency there's natural turnover. People quit. It takes time to hire a new person. That position may be vacant for a week. It may be vacant for a month. And so the shrink rate tries to adjust for those sort of temporary vacancies. In the governor's opinion, they could take a larger shrink rate reduction. There's also the SGF reductions are partially offset by an increase of $170,000 in CRF, coronavirus relief funds, from the Office of the Recovery. The agency has indicated they want to spend $60,000 in contractual services for cleaning and sanitizing, and $110,000 in commodities expenditures for personal protection. And Senator, this is also where the governor recommended the deletion of $402,000 for some of that travel, just because there's just not that much travel going on right now. The governor also recommended a decrease of 40 FTE positions below the agency's 21 revised estimate. The governor states that KDOR has maintained 70 vacant and funded FTE positions to conform with shrinkage requirements, and those positions should be eliminated. And you can see how the breakdown, and you can see 15 of those are in motor vehicle, 10 are in administration, 10 are in tax administration, and 5 are in the property valuation division. And that is the governor's recommendation for fiscal year 2021, and I would stand for questions on 21.
Committee, any questions? Senator Kirschen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question where I was back on page 1385 on the governor's allotments. it says there, included in the governor's allotment budget were 146 million in human services, adjustment 79.3 million to delay the 2021 state foundation aid payment. So if you, did you use the allotment to reduce the amount spent, but you're going to pay it when it's due, so that's not really a cut then, is it?
It would be a cut in the year in which it occurred.
The reduction would count then.
Right, it was, it kind of, and this is all of that. So the majority of this paragraph is just describing the allotment generally, just so you sort of have some background material on it. The only portions of that allotment that actually touch this budget are the Capers D&D and the CRF swap. But you're absolutely correct. It does not mean it goes away permanently. It just is a delay, but it creates a current year reduction.
It looks good on paper. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I may, the legislature has removed those twice now. This would be the third year in a row if we do it again. Any other questions, committee? Dylan, I thank you. You want to go on to 22?
I was going to go on to 22 if that's all right, and I'll try to speed it up. I just,
No,
okay, all right.
please don't,
I don't want,
because some of this is absolutely new.
absolutely. I just, I don't want to take any time away from your opportunity to ask questions of the Department of Revenue.
I have scheduled more than one day in case
Excellent.
it's needed, so we have all the time we need.
Excellent. If you could turn to page 1386, I'll discuss the fiscal year 2022 budget. So the agency is requesting $108.9 million, including $16.1 million SGF for 22. It's an all funds increase of $383,000. It's an SGF increase of about $100,000. There's a salaries and wages expenditures increased by almost $930,000 in fringe benefits. And that's Capers contributions are up $423, group health insurance is up $314, and the shrink rate reduction to $11. The big increase in Capers is really not a Capers rate increase, since the D&D was suspended via moratorium, and that's considered part of the Capers total rate. It comes back in 22, so you appear to have a very large increase in salaries and wages in fiscal year 2022. So it's just the expiration of that moratorium, which is causing that fringe rate spike. So if you go, channel modernization project should be completed in 21, which results in a $1.5 million reduction in capital outlay in 22. And the channel modernization project will have about $100,000 in ongoing annual software and hardware maintenance fees in 22. And I think that jumps to 163 in 23 in ongoing fiscal year. So it jumps up a little bit and then sort of levels off. And the reduction in the channel management project was offset by an increase in estimated aid to local units of government of $400,000 for the Special County Mineral Production Tax Fund. And that's just the assumption that as excise rates are as the price for the production of coal and oil and gas sort of normalize from their current lows, that production will go up, which means you'll have more flow through dollars. If you look at contractual services, building rental is up about $120,000. OITS fees are up about $88,000. There's a slight increase in postage that's built into that, and those are all just about normal rate increases. And I think everything else in the bullets I've sort of discussed generally above, but I would, of course, respond to additional detail if you wanted. And if you turn to the next page on page 1387, in the governor's recommendation, the governor recommends expenditures of $107.3, including $14.5 million SGF. This is an SGF decrease of $1.6 million, or about 10% below the agency request. And that reduction is primarily attributable, in fact, I think wholly attributable to the governor's recommendation to adopt the reduced resource proposal, which is in the box immediately below that. And so again, you're seeing the extension of those travel reductions, that $442,950. And there's also a recommendation to do some staff reductions, totaling about $1.2 million. The agency has indicated that that would hold approximately 25 additional positions vacant in the Department of Revenue's normal turnover, which would include delinquent tax collection staff, tax auditors, and temporary staff used to open mail during tax filing season. I believe the Department of Revenue is going to have a modification of that statement, but I would leave it up to the Department of Revenue to explain how they're dealing with that particular reduced resource proposal. But that was the reduced resource proposal that was submitted. There's some additional detail on here. We have a couple of major special revenue fund tables. These are tables that describe fees that are charged by the agency. You can see some major funding sources that are in here. And then deeper into the BA, you see program level analysis and background. So if you ever were curious about, like, in the property valuation division and what they're sort of made up in, there's some background information in here. But with that, I would stand for questions for fiscal year 2022.
Committee, any questions? Senator Alley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Of the 40, I'm on 1387, of the 40 FTE positions, how many of those are vacant today?
I'd have to look that up for you, but I believe
that
these were
part
all,
of the
at the time
shrinkage?
that they were recommended, my understanding is they were all vacant positions at the time that this recommendation occurred. I don't know for a fact that they were vacant now, but that was at the time of the recommendation, which was only a month ago.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions? So would you go over the amount of CARES money that, I know we
Certainly.
just saw from KDOT, they had an exorbitant amount. I don't think that's the same case with revenue.
It really isn't. So you have, if you go back to FY21, I don't think there's any CARES Act to speak of in 22. There is the $170,000. If you look at the page, bottom page 1384, there's about $170,000 in coronavirus relief funds, and that's cleaning and sanitizing and personal protection equipment. And Chris will correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's any other major CARES Act monies that are inside this budget.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Dylan.
You're welcome.
Chris Holm, the Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Revenue. Are you online?
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Chris Holm, and I appreciate the opportunity today to appear before you to provide information on our budget
Chris,
request.
we're
Yes.
having a little trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
We're going to try the volume on this side. Could
Okay.
you get a little closer to the microphone?
Let's try that. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I apologize. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Chris Holm, and I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss our budget for fiscal year 21 and
Chris.
22. Yes.
There is an absolute horrible echo in the room. I don't know if the rest of you hear it. Maybe it's just my hearing.
Okay.
Try adjusting.
Why don't we mute our, while I'm speaking, we can just mute our speaker.
I think when you guys are offline like that, we're going to ask you to use a headset. It might alleviate some of the echo, but we're going to try on this side again. Would you try, Chris?
Yes, can you test 1, 2, 3?
I think that's better. Committee, is that better? Okay, thank you.
Okay, still have an
Proceed.
echo, or are we okay? Okay. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Chris Holm, and I appreciate the opportunity today to appear before you to provide information on the budget request for fiscal year 21 and 22. I did submit some written testimony yesterday that looks like this, which is a supplement to what Dylan presented you, and will give you a little bit of background information on the items contained in our budget. The first couple of pages are an agency overview, and the following section is a budget overview. About 60% of our actual salaries and wages expenditures our actual expenditures each year are salaries and wages. Contractual services like building leases, software license agreements, OITS costs, those make up about 85% of our agency operating budget outside of the salaries and wage costs. Currently, the agency has about 201.5 classified positions and 847.65 unclassified FTE positions on the books. The number of positions changes from year to year due to movement within the agency, and in recent years has fluctuated due to positions being added back in IT and also adding staff each year at our driver's license stations across the state to reduce wait times. On page 3, we show a high-level agency org chart on how the agency is currently structured, and if you flip on to page 4, I included a table highlighting our primary agency funding sources. If you're not familiar with the Department of Revenue's funding sources, we're funded through a combination of state general fund, also a transfer from the state highway fund, and a combination of various fee funds. As you can see in our agency budget, about $15 million is coming from the state general fund, $50 million from the Division of Vehicles Operating Fund, which includes that transfer from the state highway fund, and other fees that we collect, which include the photo fee fund, which is when you go to get your driver's license. Part of that fee is used to produce the credential that you're receiving, and then part of it helps fund the Division of Vehicles Operations. We also have the electronic database fee fund, which the fees collected, we provide access to vehicle history and driver history records. And this is a common practice among all 50 states and has been happening here in Kansas since at least the mid-90s. We also have received, which Dylan touched on, and I'll discuss here in just a second, some COVID-19 relief funds to help with agency operations during the pandemic, mainly for the purchase of personal protective equipment and the deep cleaning of our public-facing offices as well. The agency had no enhancement requests for fiscal year 21 or 22. The next section on page 4 is a revised budget comparison that compares what was approved last spring with our fall budget submission. What I do is I go back and do a revision for the current year, which is fiscal year 21, and then do our budget for fiscal year 22. Table 3 below shows what was approved in fiscal year 21 versus what the agency submitted and the governor has recommended for fiscal year 21. And as you can see, there is a total decrease of about $392,000, which is made up of a combination of additions and deletions through each program, which I've explained below. Sometimes it may be just a simple reorganization of moving positions from one program to another. Sometimes it's eliminating or deferring costs to another fiscal year, which could also cause the revised amounts to increase or decrease. Any changes that have happened since the spring or any unanticipated or additional or reduced costs, we try to budget as accurately as possible to give you a clear picture of what's actually occurring in the agency, which is why we do a revision in the fall for the current fiscal year. The next section shows the COVID-19 relief funds or CRF funds that the agency has received from the Office of Recovery. The agency received approximately $136,000 in reimbursement for costs that we incurred back in fiscal year 20, and I estimate that we will need an approximately $170,000 in this fiscal year. As of the end of December, about $283,000 overall has been spent, and we have about roughly $20,000 to $25,000 left of the allocated $170,000 for fiscal year 21. The agency spent more in the beginning on personal protective equipment, and as we've gotten further down the road, public health expenses like janitorial, if we have a confirmed COVID case in a public-facing office, so we need to shut it down for a day to do a deep cleaning. We've also been able to, through this, been able to do a quick turnaround. Usually the office is closed for just a day to do a deep cleaning and then reopen again the next day. On page 6, the table details our fiscal year 22 budget request. And as you can see, there's a decrease of about $1.6 million from our agency request in fiscal year 22 to what the governor's recommendation was. It's mainly attributable to a 10% reduced resource package, which we submitted with our budget in September. The reduced resource package is included in the governor's budget recommendations by eliminating state general fund for state travel and also employee salaries and wages. In a worst case scenario, the agency would have to hold an additional 25 vacant positions open in addition to our normal turnover in the administration and tax operations program, which, as Dylan said, could potentially include delinquent tax collection staff, also tax auditors, and temporary staff used to open the mail during tax filing season. However, We don't anticipate that scenario this year or next year. We knew that this was potentially coming and we were going to be requested to prepare and submit a reduced resource package. So we planned ahead and we're using some of our carryover fee fund balances from the last year to supplement this reduced resource package. Luckily, the agency has the flexibility to use fee funds to make up for a decrease in state general fund, and that is the case this time. I feel comfortable that we can absorb the 1.6 million in fiscal year 22 without having any significant impact to services. And I believe in the long term, it could cause us some issues that we may need to look at a reduction of expenses and other things in the future. But for the next at least 2 years, we will be able to absorb that allotment. That's just a brief overview of my testimony that I submitted, in addition to Dylan's. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to stand for those.
Thank you, Chris. Committee, any questions? Chris, I spoke with the secretary and I appreciate the conversation. I would like you to visit a little bit about the software program and how that came about. I appreciate the efforts. I know not everybody did. When one of the first things the secretary did was to cancel a contract that probably should not have been sole sourced in the beginning. So if you would speak to that program and the dollars amount there.
Okay. The software program that we have continued is a replacement of our, after the contract was canceled, there was a portion of that was already halfway implemented that was kind of separate from the work that CGI was doing. It was a subcontractor called RSI. And what they have done is they have implemented a replacement of ACSS, which is a legacy program that we have for compliance, and also our audit work papers program as well, neither of which have been updated in the last 20 years. So the RSI project, which is nearing completion, we're all but implemented with that. What that's going to do is that's going to give us enhanced fraud detection. Also, it's going to allow us to, when we go do audits at different individuals, businesses, corporations, it's going to allow us to use a lot different data-driven methods and those type of things to pick potential audit recipients as well. So we opted to go ahead and continue with that software project and renegotiated with them after the CGI contract was canceled, and that project is just about complete.
Thank you, Chris. Committee, any questions on that? Another item, Chris, and there's not a breakout in the budget. I don't know how we would get this information, but I'd like to know how much the department has paid out in fraudulent claims in the past couple of years. We keep hearing about that with the Department of Unemployment, and I know it's also an issue on tax returns, especially federal tax returns. And if we just accept federal returns, or do we flag those if they are deemed fraudulent?
I know that there's a lot of edits in place and a lot of different things that we have set up. I'm the numbers guy, so I can't really speak to that part of it, but I can defer to one of the other experts in the room here who can maybe answer your question a little bit better than I can. Okay, I'm going to defer to Secretary Burkhart to answer that question.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you on some of these matters. We do have a system in place where we have certain tolerances within our system, and forgive me for not getting into great detail in terms of our fraud detection policies within the department. But one of the benefits that we have is that when individual income tax returns are filed with us, they are primarily based upon federal returns. And the IRS has that capability of doing that audit of that taxpayer before that information even comes to us. But we do nevertheless have our own tolerances set within our system, and it's not just a simple situation when people file their tax return and a refund is issued. That is not the case. And we have thousands of returns that get flagged and get worked individually. And not that they're all fraudulent. There are lots of innocent mistakes that get made, but nevertheless, we sort of have on an ongoing basis 1,000 or more returns that are being reviewed for any type of fraud. And Senator Tyson, in the conversation I had with you recently, I indicated that we even have within the department a unit called the Office of Special Investigations that looks into tax fraud, as well as a variety of other frauds that we would deal with at the department, dealing with fraudulent driver's licenses, car titles, things of that nature. So I'll tell you from an aspect of prosecuting for fraud, and there's been an agreement with the Attorney General's office that will allow prosecution, criminal prosecution for tax fraud. Most of the cases that have been prosecuted successfully don't deal with income tax per se. They're more focused on sales tax collection, where the retailer has collected the tax but has not remitted it to the department. And that's primarily where the prosecutions occur. But that's probably a long-winded answer, but we do have an audit routine that goes beyond what the IRS does for our state tax returns.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. That's good to hear. And I do want to let everybody know you go over and above Sunday afternoon pre-football, Super Bowl football. You were willing to take the time and work on this with me, which I appreciate very much. Committee, any other questions? Did you want to ask about the FTEs? Senator Alley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the question was the 40 FTEs that we have shown as a reduction, those are vacant now. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, that at least most of them are.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, and I would tell you, Senator, and again, this question had come up in one of my conversations. It may have been with you, Madam Chair. Within the department, when we see retirements taking place, or if individuals just leave the department, we do a pretty thorough review of that position to see if it truly is needed any longer. We have made developments, significant developments within the department in the use of our technology, and to the extent that we can take advantage of that technology and perhaps not fill vacant positions, we certainly tried to do that.
Mr. Secretary, if you would get for the committee how many of those positions that could be, again, attributed for shrinkage that we could look at. I know one of the items that I asked is if you knew of any other savings in the budget, and I would ask that you would, we can pick this up tomorrow. We're not going to make recommendations until next Tuesday, so that would give a little bit of time to look at it.
Thank you for that opportunity to spend some time with it. It's an interesting budget. So much of our budget is payroll, and so much of our budget is our fixed expenses, these long-term leases that we're in, and so there's not a great deal of discretionary spending that occurs at the Department of Revenue.
Thank you. Senator Close, did you want to ask your question? No problem. While you're looking for it, Mr. Secretary, I would draw your attention to the House bill that did change the budget, 2739 in 2016. It asked for program inventories, projects and sub-projects, funding of those. identification of why the program exists, what would happen if the program was removed. There's a lot more detail requested by the legislature, and you're not the only department or agency. None of them are doing it, and I'm hoping that next year that changes. There's a reason we passed this legislation, so I appreciate that effort.
And Senator, could you restate that bill number?
It's House Bill 2739 from 2016.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Senator Cluse.
Yes, thank you. It was just a question in regards to, they had the average customer wait time. How does that reflect with phone calls, calls received, answered, response, especially during COVID? Just curious.
Thank you, Senator. Did you hear that, Mr. Secretary?
I did. COVID presented some very interesting challenges for the department. And when the early days of the pandemic, there was a lot of uncertainty in terms of what this virus meant and the threat that it imposed to employees. My sense is that there was a delay in responding to taxpayer requests for information, working their accounts, whatever. But in a very short period of time, our Director of Taxation, Steve Stotts, and Andy Sandberg, our Chief Information Officer, moved 254 out of 340 the Division of Taxation employees to working remotely, which was no minor undertaking because of all of the security protocols that had to be put in place. But when that was done, the response times dealing with taxpayer calls obviously improved tremendously. I'm not sure that answers your question.
Senator Cluse.
I guess it was more along the lines of, here you have exactly the wait time, and do they keep track of any of that as far as wait time, response time?
And Senator, is this on taxation issues or division of vehicle wait times?
He's going off your performance measures, and it's a question that I have too. I've stated it earlier, not in this meeting, but these performances are not really performance-based measures of how the departments are doing. And one of the items, one of the checklists would be, how long does somebody have to wait on a phone call or wait before they have service? When they go to get their driver's license, whatever the case may be, since it's one of your performance measures.
Right. Honestly, I don't have that document in front of me. If I could, maybe look at that and perhaps respond to you tomorrow.
That would be excellent.
One of the things that we have tried to do, and this is in the context of getting your driver's license renewed, is to have individuals make appointments, just like you would at a doctor's office or any other office. The wait times obviously shrink considerably, and in the largest offices, we do have that opportunity to schedule appointments, and we encourage that tremendously. And given the opportunity, I might talk about some of the other things that we're trying to do to not only shorten response times for customers that come into our driver's license stations, but perhaps even at some point in time, reduce the need for some of those stations by giving drivers a better opportunity to just renew their driver's license on the phone. Again, technology that we're really trying to push and save the inconvenience of having to go into a driver's license office at all.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We are out of time for today. We'll look forward to continuing tomorrow.
Very good.
Thank you. Committee, is there any other business to be brought before us?